The story I'm about to share is a cautionary tale to those who may be wanting to rent or buy a property, to do as much research as possible. I wish that my husband and I had. I moved from Ohio, where I was born, to Massachusetts to get a fresh start. After being in Massachusetts for a while and finding myself, I met the person that I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Charlie and I dated for a year, then after getting married started looking for a place to rent and call our own. It was not long before we found a beautiful little house in a very quiet neighborhood. The house was very overgrown but had a lot of potential, so Charlie and I decided to jump on in. To give a little bit of layout of the house, it is 3 bedrooms. The master bedroom and a fairly large bedroom upstairs and a very small bedroom off of the dining room. All was well, and we adjusted to the moving in process, but not long after we started to notice strange occurrences little by little. The first to happen was when Charlie was upstairs in bed while I was downstairs browsing the internet and watching TV, being the terrible insomniac that I am. All of a sudden, Charlie came running at breakneck speed down the stairs and asked if I had just been up there. Of course, my response was no. He went as pale as could be and told me that he has been lying in bed dozing in and out and felt the blanket being pushed up so that his feet were out, and a cold hand had caressed his foot. Shortly after that, we moved our bedroom into the much smaller bedroom downstairs. However, the activity continued. We would hear heavy footsteps going up and down the stairs, have bowls and pans spin clockwise while untouched on the counters, see a dark, full-bodied figure walk past our bedroom door and disappear, a knife being lifted and thrown across the kitchen by an unseen force, while being outside looking up into the window of the master bedroom, to see an elderly lady staring down and having our dogs bark intently into the corner of our room at something we cannot see. Finally, Charlie and I talked with our neighbors to see if they could give any insight to the previous owner of this house or the previous owners. We found out that this house was built in 1700s, and the elderly lady that owned this house died here at the age of 101 years old. We have no doubts in our mind that the spirit in the house is that of the previous owner. So I set out to go upstairs and try to make peace with her. I told her that I know this is her house, but now it is our house too, and we must make peace with each other, so that we can cohabitate, or if she wants help crossing over and going to the light, where her loved ones wait for her, I would be happy to help her. I also told her that Charlie and I want to keep the house nice and she is welcome to stay if she likes, but she cannot be doing anything that is harmful in any way. We continue to live in the same house, and once in a while she makes herself known, but things are a lot more peaceful. Last year at around September 1st, I went over to my friend's house for a party. It was about 1 in the morning and everyone but myself and 4 other girls. I was the only one there who believed in ghosts and paranormal activity, which they always made fun of me for, and they decided to play in a Ouija board. I decided that instead of being a wimp about it, that I would act as if I didn't believe it, and I started to question it and ask it to prove its presence. That was the first mistake of many that we had made that night. We asked a couple of the normal questions until one of my friends asked if the spirit wanted to hurt us. Its response was, "Only one." We started to get creeped out, and the same friend who asked if it wanted to hurt us asked who it wanted to hurt. It started to spell out my full name, Natasha, which I've always hated and always gone by Tasha or T. My friends never called me by my full name since they knew about my hate for that name. I pulled my hand off the planchette and went outside as soon as it said that. My friends made the mistake, which I found out later, was that they never said goodbye to the board. That night, I have almost no memory of it. I only remember brief moments, which also happened to be the times that I would get migraines and nosebleeds. My friends took videos to show me and told me that I was acting weird, my voice had changed, and at brief moments I was even talking in different languages. That night wasn't the only occurrence of that, though. My family told me that I was acting different and that my voice was off. Like that night, the only times that I remembered it was when I was getting migraines and nosebleeds. 2 weeks after that, I thought that I was back to normal. My friends and family thought that too. until I suddenly got hospitalized for an entire week for the pain that doctors couldn't figure out. My kidney had gotten too bad that it almost shut down. They could think of no reason that it would have happened. I got every type of medical test you could have done, yet nothing showed up. One day, the same day that I was scheduled for a surgery to take out my kidney, all the symptoms that I had were gone. After one day of a careful watch with no symptoms, I was released. Since that incident, I have never felt like I was alone. I always hear people talking when there's no one there. I sometimes feel someone grabbing my hands. I've even had the feeling of someone grabbing my neck to the point that I couldn't breathe. I've been known to have paranormal experiences too, but after that night, instead of harmless things, it's been dangerous and threatening. I love my grandparents. I always have had a great relationship with them, but I hate their house. The house has been in our family for over a century and was owned by my great-grandmother before it was passed down to my grandfather. However, something had always seemed off about the house. My friends would go over there and they would say that it's cold, even though the air was off, or I feel like I'm being watched, was also another common thing for them to say to me. Well, when my great-grandmother passed away, me and my mother moved into the house. We lived there for about a month, but moved back to our old house. I never want to spend the night in the house after what happened. In my old room, I had a bathroom. It was very small. It had enough room for a toilet and a small sink, but that was it. The night we moved in, I woke up in the middle of the night for no reason. I got up and went to my bathroom when the door behind me shut on its own and locked. My bathroom lock was broken, meaning it shouldn't have been able to lock, and the only light in the bathroom besides my phone went out. I've always have had an obsession with ghost hunting, which made me a peculiar child, so I already had a ghost hunting app. I didn't believe worked until after that day. It was a simple app with a radar and a text box over the radar. It was supposed to tell you whatever the spirit was saying. I remember feeling like someone was breathing down my neck when the door unlocked and the radar picked up one word. Run! I ran back to my bed and hid under the covers till I fell asleep. The next day I was exhausted but went to sleep soundly. Once again, however, I woke up in the middle of the night for no reason. I figured it was because I was hungry. I went to the kitchen and got a snack. The kitchen is connected to the living room, and the living room has a door that leads outside. Then there's the pantry. The pantry was a room that branched off of the kitchen and had no door. I was in the kitchen when, I swear I really say this, I saw a dark figure in it pick something up, turn to me, and disappear. I wanted to scream, but from the terror I was feeling, all I could get out was, "What the hell?" I went to go back to my room, but the living room door slammed shut just as I walked towards it. Once again, I felt something or someone breathe down my neck, causing me to flinch and jiggle the door knob in desperation. Finally, after what felt like forever, the door opened, and I ran to my room once again, hiding. However, I didn't sleep. I kept hearing footsteps on the porch. My mother blamed raccoons, but I don't think they could impersonate the sound of footsteps perfectly. The next night I decided to try to sleep in the den, considering I never felt scared there. Foolish mistake. I laid there restless with my phone. Finally, it picked up a signal. Quentin was what it said, and it caused me to freeze. Quentin was my great-grandfather's name. I felt so sick. I laid there praying that Mom would wake up, and luckily it stopped. I don't know why, but that was the last bit of activity in the house that I've seen. I'm glad we moved back. Just seeing the house makes me uncomfortable. I used to visit my friend at her house out in a rural farming area before she moved. I'd sleep over a lot, and we'd just hang out and draw. I usually slept in the living room on the couch, and there were 2 mirrors in the room fairly close to the TV. When the TV was off and I was walking by, I started seeing shadows move behind me. I thought it was just a warped TV screen or something. Then, one evening, I walked into the living room to get my sketchbook so I could sketch in her bedroom. I bent over and picked it up, stood up straight, looked in the mirror, and there was a man behind me. A man standing in the hallway leading to the living room. He was average height, bald, and a bit old. I turned to look at him and no one was there. Turned to look at the mirror again around. and he was gone. I felt a little spooked. Another time we were just sitting in the living room, and we heard what sounded like little kids' footsteps running across the upstairs quickly. She had 2 adult siblings, but they were out at work, leaving us alone. Around that time, I decided to sleep in my friend's room instead of the living room, only to wake up in the middle of the night to see 4 of her posters slowly get peeled off the wall. It wasn't them falling and dragging each other down. They looked as if someone were carefully unsticking the tape and taking them down. The next morning, my friend put them back up, saying, "I need to get better tape for these." She and her family eventually moved out because they couldn't afford to live there anymore. We had never really talked about what happened in the house, as if talking about it would make it worse. But after she moved, I finally said, "Dude, your house was haunted. I hope you realize that." She replied with, "Yeah. I knew it was some guy and his granddaughter lived there, but he killed her and then himself, so it was probably them or something. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to scare you away from hanging out with me." Then she dug out a copy of a news article she got from a local paper about the murder. The picture that went with the article was a picture of the man I saw standing behind me. In one corner of my grandma's living room stood a lamp that was almost never turned off. She would change the bulb every week like clockwork, waiting until the afternoon sunlight poured through the windows and filled the room. Even then she hurried, holding her breath until the deed was done and the lamp was back on. I would ask her about it once in a while. Each time she would smile softly, tousle my hair, and promptly change the subject. I didn't learn the truth until I was 13, the first time I turned off the lamp. I just wanted to see what would happen. Grandma screamed when she walked into the darkened living room, a plate of cookies falling from her hands and crashing to the floor. I could hear her praying under her breath as she raced to turn the light back on. Tears were shining in her eyes when she turned to me, her lips pressed thin. Without warning, she slapped me hard across the face. Grandma had never so much as raised her voice before, and I was too shocked to cry. She cried enough for both of us, gathering me up in her arms and begging for my forgiveness. With her face buried in my shoulder, she finally told me about the lamp. She said, "It was a ghost light." Ever since she and my grandpa had bought the house back when they first arrived in America, the spirits of the dead had plagued her. Only when her burden threatened to drive her mad did she ask Grandpa for help. She had expected him to laugh her out of the house, but he had surprised her by nodding gravely. It was he who had first lit the ghost light, and as long as that beacon burned through the darkness, she had never seen another spirit. I stopped visiting my grandma after that. It started gradually at first, missing a day here and there, but by the time I received news of her death, I hadn't seen her in over 10 years. As her only living relative, I shouldn't have been surprised when I inherited her house. Yet as I sat in her lawyer's office, listening to him read her will, I was speechless. I had a difficult time paying attention after that, absorbed as I was with the business of remembering. So much love had filled those walls, so many happy memories. As I thought of my tiny, sterile apartment in the city, I quickly made my decision. I was almost overwhelmed by emotion as I walked through the front door. Everything looked exactly as I remembered it from my childhood. Houseplants still cluttered the windowsills, decorative bird plates still hung on the walls, and the ghost light still burned in the living room. Seeing the old lamp sent a chill down my spine. I froze in my tracks, the smile fading from my lips, and I couldn't help but think of the night Grandma had slapped me so many years ago. I had told my mother about the ghost light the next day, but she had dismissed it as simple old-world superstition. She told me it was the same way when she was growing up, and I shouldn't worry about it. Still, I couldn't shake the conviction that I had finally seen the true depths of my grandma's lunacy. I ran my fingers through the fringe on the lampshade as I thought, a bloom of sadness darkening my nostalgia. Sighing heavily, I turned the ghost light off with a decisive click. Something woke me later that night. I lay in bed listening to the darkness until I heard scratching, coming from the living room. Rats were the last thing I wanted to deal with at the moment, and I rolled over with a groan, determined to ignore it until the morning. The scratching continued intermittently, constantly jerking me from the edge of sleep, and I finally had enough. I threw the blankets off me and stormed out into the hall. Moonlight flooded the front of the house, and I didn't bother turning on lights as I made my way to the living room. I knew every inch of the house, even after so many years, and I moved confidently through the dim light. I was furious at having been woken from a dead sleep, and my anger ill-prepared me for what I found. An elderly woman was crouched in the corner, her gaunt back to me. She was scratching at the floor where the walls met, stopping every few minutes to cock her head. A gnarl of dread unfurled in the pit of my stomach. I had no idea how this woman had gotten into my house, and though it was obvious she needed help, it took me some time to summon the courage to approach her. My hand shook as I reached out to gently squeeze her shoulder. I meant to ask her where she lived, who her caretaker was, but the words were driven from my mind when she turned and I saw her face. Her eyes were solid black, bottomless pits that didn't reflect the moonlight. Her jaw hung impossibly open, unhinged, and the dark tunnel of her mouth spiraled down into her throat. I had a moment to realize who she was, to recognize the familiar map of wrinkles in her face, the curls of her wispy hair. Then my grandma screamed. I shrieked, stumbling backwards away from the nightmare in the corner. My arms flailed in the air, reaching for the nearest lamp, and my hands touched the ghost light. I yanked the chain, filling the room with light, and she was gone. I never turned off the ghost light after that. After letting the bulb burn out one evening, I began changing it every week just as Grandma had. Eventually, I got married, and luckily for me, my wife was tolerant of my strange fixation on the lamp. The light continued to burn, and I lived my life happily enough. But my grandson has been asking about the ghost light lately. Each time he asks, I smile softly, tousle his hair, and promptly change the subject. For some reason, I can't bring myself to tell him the truth. I think about how I pulled away from my grandma, how I thought her crazy, and I keep my mouth shut. I worry, though. I know I won't be around forever, just as I know he will eventually turn off the ghost light. I worry that he might see me then, twisted and wrong, scratching in the corner. We rented a house that never felt like home. You always felt creeped out walking in there like you were being watched. My boyfriend and our roommate both worked nights, so I would be there by myself a lot. One night I was doing my usual stuff and watching some TV before bed. I had this overwhelming feeling all night that I should avoid the hallway and not look directly down it. It was creepy. The feeling of being watched and terrified lasted about 2 hours before I decided to sucky it up and make my way to my room. I left the hallway lights on and went to bed. Just as I turned off the side table light, I heard a drawer being pulled out and hitting the stopper. I turned on the light and nothing was out of place. This went on about 6 times before I decided I was sleeping with the light on. I curled up under the covers and waited for my boyfriend to get home. He comes rolling in about 3 a.m. He's laughing at me for being such a coward. Gets into bed and turned the light off, and that's when all hell broke loose. All the doors down the hallway slammed shut, one by one. Then, our closet doors started rattling. The sound coming from inside could only be described as total destruction. It sounded like the shelves, the pole, and everything in there were being tossed around. My boyfriend joined me under the covers, and we were both terrified. After it stopped, it took 5 to 10 minutes to convince him to go check around the house. Nothing was out of place, and our roommate had drove 3 hours back home that night to be with his family, so we knew it wasn't him. We slept with the light on the rest of the night and moved out soon after. I still can't drive by that house without being creeped out. I grew up in an older home in Florida. I have 2 brothers, and since I was the only girl, I got to have my own room on the 2nd floor, a room that I would end up fearing at night. We lived in this house until we moved when I was 17. I don't remember anything strange happening until I was around 15. Just the normal, Mom asking us kids where we put a glass or a book. Small things that none of us touched. In hindsight, that was probably either the man or the boy. I came home late one night from a football game at my high school. It was around 10 p.m. My younger brother had a friend over, and they liked to play pranks on me. When I poked my head in to say hello, I made sure I asked if they wouldn't mess with me that night since I had to get up early for a soccer game. They both agreed and wished me a good night. The way my room was set up at the time was there was the actual main part of the room, had my TV, dresser, a couch, and coffee table that I would use for my friends staying over or when I was reading. My bed was in a little alcove that used to be a small porch, so that my bed was flush with the windows that looked to the backyard. I put my bag on the couch and walked over to the bed to go to sleep. It was the middle of the night when someone knocking on the wooden bed frame woke me up. I thought it was my brother and his friend who were just going to be annoying and run out of the room giggling. I flipped over to yell at them but didn't see my brother. There was a boy about the age of 12 with sandy brown hair that hung to his chin, wearing a purple hoodie, just smiling at me, like a kid who got caught doing something he shouldn't have been. And I could see right through him to the rest of the room. I watched as he slowly faded away, completely terrified until he was gone. I slept on the couch that night with the TV going in the background, and I moved my bed to the center of the room after that. The next morning I had almost talked myself out of it, thinking it was a dream or had really been the boys. I asked them the next morning if they had knocked on my bed, but both were sound asleep. My mom had overheard me and said she had seen the boy too. Since that night we started to notice more strange things, but I am positive it wasn't the boy. There was a man, a mean man, that I could feel at night in my room. We would hear footsteps walking around upstairs when all of us were in the kitchen. Books would fly from the shelves and glasses would be pulled down and break. Our dogs would stand at the bottom of the stairs that led to the second floor and just growl. One of the most eerie things was the smell of cigarette smoke in the downstairs hallway. No one in our family smoked inside, ever. One of the last things that happened before we moved was my brother waking up to see a tall, dark figure standing over me while I was sleeping. The entire family at that point had seen or experienced something. The boy was just a kid who wanted to be known. The man was something else. None of us were sad to drive away from that house for the last time. I live in a family of 3. My dad, my brother, and me. We are pretty close, and recently we decided to purchase a pool table. We found one secondhand. The seller told us the tragic story of his brother passing away, so he was selling all of his old stuff. It wasn't a natural death, but he didn't really want to talk about it in detail, which I didn't really care for at the time anyway. We played some games the first night, and I won most games. After that, we all went to bed. Our ritual is that we brush our teeth together and then go to our own room at the same time and wish each other a good night. I already had a few beers that night, and so did my family. When we turned off the lights and said our final words for that night, nothing appeared to be out of the ordinary. A few hours passed and I dozed off while browsing some Reddit on my phone. I would have forgotten about this night if it weren't for what happened next. My eyelids snapped open at the sound of a large thud, an unmistakable sound of 2 pool balls hitting each other, followed by a bit of a sinister laugh, one I didn't recognize. Did my dad go back downstairs and invite a friend? Shocked still from the sudden awakening, I realized that something was wrong. It could not have been my dad. I could clearly hear his faint snoring coming from the next room. We was just as asleep as I was a minute ago, but there it was, another thud coming from downstairs, followed by another laugh. I looked downstairs, but it was pitch black. Who would play pool in the dark, I thought. I didn't want to wake up anyone, so I went downstairs on my own to see who was in our living room playing pool. I had to be careful. Our staircase makes a lot of noise, so I had to evade some of the planks. Looking through the bars into the living room, I couldn't see anything. It was too dark. I heard another thud, followed by the sound of a ball rolling over the table. My heartbeat was inside of my throat and chills were going down my spine. This is not normal. I am looking straight at the table, but it is completely dark. I can barely see the shape of the table, but the sounds leave no other explanation. Somebody is playing pool in the dark. Suddenly I hear a plank creak under my foot. I must have slightly moved. The next few moments were even more unexplainable than what had already happened. A loud sound of wood on cold stone. The person must have dropped the cue from being startled by the sound I made. I flicked on the lights to confront whoever this was, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. The cues were neatly in their holders, and the balls were also stored under the table. I had a look around for another few minutes. Confused, I walked back up the stairs to see my brother sleeping in his bed. It couldn't have been him. It's been 6 days since there is a new pool table in our living room. It's been 7 nights of thuds followed by sinister laughing. I have lost the courage to go downstairs to check again. I pretend like it's my dad and my brother who are playing pool, but deep down I know it can't be them. The snoring is the definitive proof of that. When I was 13, I experienced the ghost of my grandmother. She died in her sleep while taking a nap on the living room couch. Afterwards, according to my father and grandfather, every now and then they could hear her make the trip from the bedroom to the kitchen and open the refrigerator door. A trip she made many times when she was alive. At first, I thought my father and grandfather were making this up, having fun at my expense. A couple years after she passed away, my father and I went to spend the weekend with my grandfather. My father and I slept on the living room couch. It opened into a double bed. The same couch my grandmother died on. My grandfather left the house to go to a next-door neighbor's house to play poker. My father and I went to bed in the living room. My father went right to sleep. I laid awake reading a magazine. After a while, I heard the noise of the back bedroom door being pulled open. I heard the sound of shuffling feet. I heard the creak in the floor directly in front of the bathroom doorway. I heard more shuffling feet. Then I heard the fridge door being pulled open, and I heard the sound of glass bottles in the fridge door clinking against each other. Back then, they were still putting soft drinks in glass bottles. Feeling thirsty, I decided to get out of bed and go join my grandfather in the kitchen for a cold drink. I go into the kitchen, only to find myself all alone. I was puzzled. I could have sworn I heard my grandfather walk from the bedroom into the kitchen and open the fridge. Then I remembered that my grandfather wasn't home. He was over the neighbor's house, and he hadn't come back yet. Then I remembered my grandfather's and father's ghost stories. Then I got scared. I raced from the kitchen into the living room and leaped over my sleeping father into my side of the bed. Then I went to sleep. I don't know how long I slept before I woke up with a start, a feeling of paralyzing fear in my body. I was frozen. I was lying on my right side. It took a while for me to work up the courage to turn my head to the left. My head was covered by my blanket. There was a shadow being cast onto my blanket. The shadow was the outline of a head and shoulders of a woman with a beehive hairdo. My grandmother used to always have a beehive hairdo even years after it went out of style, up until she died. I heard heavy breathing coming from the shadow. I had to work up the courage to move one of my hands to remove the blanket off of my face. When I did, in an instant, the paralyzing fear I felt was gone. The shadow was gone. The sound of heavy breathing was gone. My father was still sleeping. I pulled the blanket back over my head and went back to sleep. Only to wake up again on my right side, the paralyzing fear was back. Forcing myself to turn my head, the shadow was back. The heavy breathing was back. Again, I had to summon up all my courage to move my hand to take my blanket off my face, only to find nothing there and the paralyzing fear gone. I went through this same routine the entire night. I lost count of how many times this happened through the night. Maybe a dozen, maybe more. But it happened a lot. The next morning, I told my father what happened to me throughout the entire night while he slept. The sounds of the bedroom door opening, the shuffling feet, the fridge door opening, nobody in the kitchen, being awakened with a paralyzing fear, the shadow, the heavy breathing, the repeat performances throughout the night. I kind of expected him to tell me that I was just seeing and hearing things, but instead he smiled and exclaimed, "That was Grandma." I went to USC. I was in a dorm as my home state is about 17 hours from there. Every night would end the same with me finishing classwork or editing videos for a little bit of side money for YouTubers or kids who post to Instagram. Every night I would finish and hop in the shower. It was all the same every night. There was one night, though, I will never forget. I was showering and I heard my front door creak open, as it always did when it would open to a certain point. I quickly turned off my shower and listened for any sound. Not a sound. I had my phone on the sink and I decided best thing to do is call one of my buddies. I called him and he answered. He sounded very sluggish and like he didn't want to go anywhere. But as soon as I told him what I heard, it was almost like you could hear his eyes open over the phone. He set his phone down and got clothes on, then returned to the phone and started talking to me. Then I heard a loud crash of what sounded like a piece of metal. This was weird to me as I didn't have very many things in my dorm that were made of metal. My friend asked me what had happened and I told him I had no clue. I heard his front door open over the phone and then he said he's be right up. I hear loud footsteps coming down the hallway that sounded like a jog. I quickly dried off, threw my clothes on, and received a text from my friend. He said, "I'm outside your door, it's wide open," and I replied that I hear heavy breathing. "Throw the door open and I will come out," as I hear the door hit. I prepared myself by the door handle to be sure I'd do as I told him. I hear the door hit the wall and I throw the door open. I see nothing. My friend looks at me and then looks around the room. The room was untouched. We look around the room and find nothing. With both our eyes still wide open, we walk down to his room for the night and I decide to sleep there. We wake up the next morning and we go to check my room one more time. We open the door and this time my pillows and blankets were thrown across my floor. We pick up the blankets and pillows before noticing that there was scratches on the wall that had never been there before. We got campus security and they checked our room and figured it was us just messing with them and saying that we would need to pay for the damages. Luckily, my friend and I had talked him into believing us, and he called some local ghost hunters. Nothing about them was professional, and they found no evidence. Me and my friend, to this day, never forget what happened in dorm room 327 on USC. I'm a freshman in college. I've had more than just one paranormal encounter, but this is by far the worst. I attend an all-girls Catholic school, and it's almost 100 years old with cemeteries on campus for the nuns we have. That's not relevant to this story, but I just wanted to provide details. Anyway, it was about 10 p.m. on a weekday when I started getting bubble guts. I had to use the restroom, and I mean use the restroom. I hate going second in the restroom on my floor because someone is always in there. Before I tell you this next part, I just want to say that I have been doing this for a very long time and never face any problems until that day. I use the restroom in the basement. I promise. The basement doesn't look like what you think it does. It looks decent and it connects to the first floor lobby via a small staircase, so I was never afraid. Not only that, but the restroom down there is pretty nice and clean. When the elevator brought me down to the basement, I walked in getting ready to do my business. When I opened the bathroom door, I noticed a stall door was closed. I was surprised because in all my times doing this, no one was ever in here besides another freshman teammate of mine, who did the same. Immediately thinking it was her, I peered under the stalls to see her blue Crocs. Except there was nothing there, no feet. I figured someone got embarrassed that I walked in and picked up their feet or something like that. I decided to leave them alone, and as I turned my back to leave, the toilet paper in that stall started getting yanked out. It was being pulled out so fast it made its container shake, making a loud noise. My heart picked up its pace, but I convinced myself that someone was in there and was just now in a rush. I left and headed towards the elevator. After I pushed the button, the toilet paper stopped. It was taking forever, and just as I was losing my patience, I heard the stall door from inside the restroom fly open. It flew open as if someone had kicked it open. At this point, I knew the stairs were the smart option. The stairwell is located right next to the elevator, so I wasted no time. I opened the basement door, and just as I stepped into the stairwell, the bathroom door opened, but again as if someone had kicked it open with enough force to make it hit the wall. My brain was still telling me that it was just a person who was in a rush, but my body didn't let me turn around to check. Just as I had made it up the first flight of stairs, the worst thing happened. the basement door that I had just walked through swung open, again, as if someone kicked it open. Following that, loud, heavy, and fast footsteps were coming up after me, and they were moving quickly. I was afraid but didn't let it get to me. I had already passed the first floor door, and I only lived on the second floor, so I started running. The other footsteps seemed to be echoing so loud throughout the stairwell. I was getting my keys ready to open my floor door. When I got to it, I unlocked the door while hearing the footsteps get closer and louder. I ran inside and bolted to my room door, the first door on the left wing. I put my back against my room door and waited. Just a second later, the same loud footsteps ran through the hall and sounded like they stopped in the dead in the middle. I poked my head around the corner, expecting to see my teammate pranking me, but there was nothing, except the stairwell door closing. I ran to the middle of that area to look down the right wing hall, and there was still nothing. I still tell myself that it was just a person who was in a rush, and I just didn't see them. The sound of the toilet paper and the sounds of the fast, heavy footsteps haunt me when I think about them. I'm uneasy and unsure about the whole incident. The only thing I'm sure about is that I'll never go back to that restroom again. The story of the stairwell took place in my first semester of college. The one I'm about to tell you took place in the middle of my second semester. Just to give time frame. During winter break, my roommate decided to bunk our beds. I was home and she stayed on campus, so she and her cousin had done it. I was excited about it since we've talked about it before. When I came back to school, I had the bottom bunk, which I was grateful for. Every time my roommate laid on the top bunk, the bottom of her mattress would sag from her weight. I would often put my feet under her mattress and push up, making her jump. We thought it was funny. She worked for Amazon and had the graveyard shift. On the weekends and a couple of weekdays, she would leave around 6 p.m. and come back at 5 a.m. One particular Friday night, I had returned to my dorm at about 10 p.m. after hanging out with some friends. I knew it would be empty since my roommate was long gone for work. I remember this really uneasy feeling I got from the room. I stood in the doorway staring at everything. It looked fine, there was nothing weird about it, but something just felt off. I even thought about sleeping in a friend's room, but I was too exhausted and just brushed it off as post-hanging out sadness. I changed, threw on my headphones, and before I knew, I had drifted off. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. I remember being cold despite always being hot. I remember looking at my room. Everything was lit up a deep red because of my roommate's LED lights she had put up. I was confused that they were on until a quiet moan threw me off. It sounded very raspy. It was so quiet I couldn't figure out if the noise was in my head or if it had really happened. That same uneasy feeling started creeping up my spine. My head whipped around and I was staring at the sagging mattress above me. I breathed a sigh of relief knowing my roommate was there. I put my feet under her mattress and gently pushed, and it felt heavier than usual. Like a lot heavier. At this point, I was thinking she snuck someone in while I slept. I heard the raspy moan again and knew it was definitely coming from above me. The sound of it really struck dead in me. It almost sounded like an old man sleeping with his mouth open. That's the best I could describe it. When I noticed it was still pitch black outside, I wondered what time it was. When my roommate got back, the sun was usually peeking through. I reached for my phone to check the time, and when I did, my heart sunk. It was only midnight, and my roommate never got off early, let alone 5 hours early. At this point, I was very uncomfortable, and I knew that I wouldn't sleep until I saw for myself who the hell was there. Even if she did sneak someone in, I would be kind of upset, so I wanted to check. I was creeping out of my bed to check. The second my foot hit the floor, the mattress above me moved. The sound of it moving wasn't any type of shuffling. It sounded like all of weight on it had been lifted. It scared me, so I quickly ran and turned around. I started crying. There was no one else in the room. I just remember feeling really defeated and empty. The whole thing felt like it lasted hours, but it was really only a matter of minutes. There was no one else awake at this hour, so I called my friends from back home since I was a few hours ahead of them. I cried telling them the story. I had all the lights on and was sitting on my desk telling them. They knew about the stairwell story and marked it up to me still being scared of that, so my brain made it up. I hung up feeling flustered and exhausted, but I didn't want to sleep. I watched TV until my roommate got back and I told her what happened. My roommate laughed it off until she climbed up to her bunk, which is when she paused. She asked if I had laid on it or something and I said no. When I asked why, she said her bed was messy and before she left for work her bed was made. I couldn't sleep with the lights off after that. The sound of the raspy moan and the sound of the mattress really stuck with me. When I go back next year, I won't be having a roommate. It will be good since my current roommate and I left off on bad terms. I have had other encounters, but these two were by far the worst. When I was 16 years old, babysitting was an additional source of income, and I was lucky enough to have many families in my area that needed a babysitter. A lady that babysat for quite often asked me one day if I would mind caring for her sister's baby. She mentioned that her sister had a hard time keeping a babysitter. Well, of course, I thought it was due to the child. I didn't mind at all. I quickly accepted the job, meaning more income for myself, and she was a super nice lady. However, I didn't like her husband. He didn't want to be bothered with the baby at all, and he was always in a mood. For the most part, he was away a lot. My first day, she made a point to tell me that the house was quirky, making a lot of strange noises and whatnot. She told me to call her if I had any problems. I thought it was strange, but dismissed it as just being because she was nervous to leave her baby with a new sitter. My first week was really uneventful. A few weird noises, but I just dismissed them. One distinctive thing that I remember about the house was that it was always dark. Even on the brightest day, it was always really dark. During the day, you still had to have the lights on, even with the curtains open. The baby, who was only 6 months old, had a cute rainbow nightlight. It was an older one that you manually had to use some force to click on and off. Once it lightened up some in the morning, I would go and turn off the nightlight. Well, morning came, and I turned off the nightlight. I went out to the living room to catch up on some homework, and as soon as I got settled, the baby started screaming. I rushed into his room. He was hysterical and the nightlight was on. I know for a fact that I turned it off. It wasn't a mistake or something I thought I did. I played it in my mind over and over again. I know that I turned that light off. I took the baby and comforted him. I was so disoriented and scared I didn't even try to turn it off again. I thought if something wants it on, it can be on. I didn't tell the mother about the nightlight. Every day she would come and ask me if everything was okay, and I knew she wasn't just talking about her son. Over the next few weeks, the experiences came more and more often. Lights turning on and off and doors closing by themselves. All of the events finally came to a peak. I was in the kitchen mixing oatmeal for the baby, when from behind something tugged the bottom hem of my shirt and hard. It was so hard that my shirt tightened around my neck. I turned around and no one was there. I screamed and ran into the living room where the baby stared at me from his high chair like I was crazy. I didn't tell his mother about this either. I don't know why I didn't tell her. Maybe I was scared that she would think I was crazy, or maybe I just didn't want to bother her with it, or maybe I was just scared since I never told anyone. Finally, she and her husband moved out of the house that fall, making their stay only 10 months. I was the only babysitter who managed to be permanent during their time. I never discussed the events that happened there. Later, I did some research on the area. It's incredibly rural and as southern as you can get. It also has a rich history in Indian tribes. While looking up the house, I discovered that during its construction, evidence of a full Indian burial site had been discovered. In my life, I've seen some things. Some things that are odd. When I was 8 or 9, I lived in a small trailer park. I had a few friends there and we'd often spend time near a large house made at some point in the 1810s. The house itself was blocked off to public. However, there was a tire swing just outside the gate, which is where me and my friends would often hang out over there. One fall day, me and my friends, let's call them Claire and Quinn, decided to spend our day by the tire swing, and good off the way we usually did. Quinn sat on the tire swing and was goofing off. when she noticed a light was on in one of the rooms inside the house. Since no one was allowed in the home, we'd figured the lights didn't work, but apparently we were wrong. Soon the light went off and we brushed it off and assumed it was some idiot kids trespassing. A few minutes later, another light on the lower floor came on. The lights continuously shut on and off, and me, Claire, and Quinn were thoroughly confused. That's when we saw him. Claire's eyes locked onto a window. I looked at what she was staring at so intently. In the second floor window, a man as white as a sheet stood looking at us. I don't know how I know, but the feeling from looking at him told me that he or it wasn't human. Quinn looked pale and Claire tugged on Quinn's shirt to get her attention. The lights shut off and all three of us sprinted out of there. I haven't seen or heard about anything like that happening there ever since, and quite frankly, I hope I never do. Granted, we don't know who or what that was. We all could tell that whatever it was wasn't safe and certainly not normal. To really get my story, you have to have an understanding of my third-floor landing. There's a single set of stairs that lead up to it. Once on the landing, it's a T-shape, with an office to the left, my bedroom to the right, and straight ahead is a bathroom with a shower. Anyway, one night at 10 p.m. I'm taking a shower before I head to sleep. The glass panels on my shower is that, like, convex glass that blurs everything, so everything was blurred and unclear. I glance at the door, and I see some kind of hand-like figure. Now, it was pitch black, so right there it freaked me out because I come from a family of pale white Welsh people. What freaked me out more was how the hand seemed to come through the door, or at least an angle where whomever the hand belonged to would be visible. All it did was hit the lights. That's it. No noise, no attack or anything. It just turned off the damn lights. So there I am. I just witnessed a phantom hand, and now I'm in my shower and it's pitch damn black. I've never been so chilled to the bone before. Something about being in the darkness of the night, with the only noise being the water hitting the floor beneath me, just reduced me to the most primal state of pure fear I've ever been in. I eventually get myself to leave the shower and hit the lights. The relief that came over me was immense. I've never been able to explain it. The stairs up to the landing are old and creak like hell. I would have heard someone come and go down. No one was in my room, or the office. Weirder still, nothing like it has happened since. Before one of users of Reddit got down to recounting their scariest of ghost stories, about living in a place that was obviously teeming with honest-to-goodness members of the spiritual world. They pointed out the irony of ghost stories that begin with the phrase, "I don't believe in ghosts, but..." After all, no matter how a ghost story begins, it always hinges on the notion that, come on, of course we believe in ghosts. A few years ago, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Melbourne, Australia, they went on to recall. It was my first time living on my own. The apartment block had been built in the 1930s. I'd been there for a few months when I came home from work one day and went into the bathroom. I saw something strange. A wooden board which had covered a hole in the ceiling that led to a small attic space lay fractured in two pieces on the ground. I examined the pieces. The board was an inch thick, and it would have taken Bruce Lee to break it. I thought the landlord had sent someone to work on the attic. I was frozen stiff with fear. Someone is up there for sure, I thought. I emailed pictures to the landlord, asking if anyone had been there, with an undertone of annoyance since she hadn't warned me. Her reply read, "Please call me as soon as you are able to." I called, and she explained that her last two tenants had said the same thing happened. She promised to replace the board, and she did. A month later, I woke up one night around 4 a.m. My body was covered in goosebumps. It felt like someone was rubbing his or her hands on me. Everything was silent, but then I heard a dragging sound coming from above my bed. It was as if someone was pulling a sack of potatoes. I froze, convinced someone was up there. There is no way an animal could make that sound. After 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to turn on the light, armed myself with a cricket bat and walked to the bathroom. That's when I saw that the new board covering the hole was broken in two. I felt sick. The dragging sound had stopped. but I heard something else, whispering. The sound was clear and coming from the attic. It sounded like children's voices, and I could hear one sentence repeated over and over. "It's your turn. It's your turn." I switched on every light in the apartment to make things feel normal. It was 5 a.m. and dark outside. I watched TV to try to unwind. Then a fuse blew. My pet budgie, Dexter, whom I kept in the kitchen, usually never made a sound at night, but he started squawking like he was being strangled. I'd never heard him make those sorts of noises. He was screaming. I grabbed my car keys, ran out, sat in my car, and waited there until the sun came up. When I saw people walking their dogs, this comforted me enough to go back in. The front door was open, but I figured I might have forgotten to close it when I ran out. I went to the kitchen to check on Dexter, but he wasn't in his cage. I felt sick again. All my windows were closed, so I looked everywhere inside. When I walked to the bathroom, I heard splashing. Dexter was half drowned in the toilet. I took him out, washed him, and dried him. I was so confused. At 8 a.m., I called the landlord and gave her a watered-down version of the night. She said, "Oh, wow, you heard the whispering too." I stayed in that apartment for another 18 months. I heard the whispering on a few occasions, and twice the board covering the hole in the ceiling moved. Although I live elsewhere now, the landlord recently called. She said that her new tenants had begged to speak with me about some of the stuff that's been going on there. Forget it. It's their problem now. I bought a new house in the small town of Winthrop. The house was cheap, but the most important part was that I needed to get away from the city. A few months ago, I had a run-in with a stalker. While I had managed to get him arrested, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes just constantly watching me. I felt like there were eyes everywhere, at home and on the street, so I decided to move out into the country to somewhere with less people, just for peace of mind. The house itself was big and somewhat old, but otherwise very welcoming. The agent who introduced me to the house had been required to mention that a serial killer had lived here in the past, which was why the house was so cheap. However, he and later my next-door neighbor Sarah both told me to pay the thought no mind. 4 other owners had lived in the house since then, and all of them were very happy with it. I loved the house. Its interior furnishings were beautiful and very comfortable. The people of Winthrop were friendly, often bringing over freshly baked pastries or inviting me over for dinner. They said, "Get-togethers were the key to making sure everyone who lived in Winthrop loved it there." Yet after a week, I stopped loving it. The feeling of someone watching returned, worse than before. I tried to ignore it, but soon I started losing sleep. Giant bags grew under my eyes and I began yawning almost as much as I breathed. Sarah was kind enough to let me stay in her house for a few nights. It was during this time that I heard the legend of Forrest Carter, the serial killer who had lived in my house while no one knows his exact kill count. Carter, also known as the Winthrop Peacock, was a man with extremely severe case of narcissism. Legends say that he couldn't fall asleep if he didn't feel like he was being watched. He was finally arrested for putting up a scarecrow to watch him during the night. Only it wasn't a scarecrow. Carter had murdered a 17-year-old girl, just so her corpse could stare at him. The story gave me shivers, and after I went home, I felt like there were hundreds of pairs of eyes just watching me no matter how I turned. Today, however, was the first day that I acted out. I was cooking breakfast when I felt the eyes. Instinctively, out of fear, I threw my kitchen knife, which lodged itself into the wall. As I pulled it out, I found myself staring at a pair of eyes, pickling in formaldehyde. I've been watching the police peel away the drywall of my house for hours now. So far, they've found 142 pairs of eyes in little glass jars. The scariest thing is, each and every one was staring at me. All of this happened when I was 12 to 16 years old. I'm now 25 and haven't felt a spirit ever since I felt better. My mom and I used to live in a 3-story apartment. The upper floor was basically my own, with my room, a bathroom, and a tiny hallway. I think it all started with my mom asking me where I put certain things. She couldn't find documents that had been in the living room before, or small things such as pens. Naturally, she blamed me, but when things that belonged to me went missing, she no longer believed that I hid them. Apart from this, the television turned itself off and on a couple of times. However, none of this makes you think this apartment is haunted. So, we weren't too worried. Around 1 year later, when I was 13, my depression got a bit worse and things in our apartment got weirder. I was asleep but woke up abruptly, only to start crying. I suddenly felt someone petting my cheek, the way you do it when babies are crying. I immediately felt comforted and fell back asleep. I remember when I had one of my friends over, we stood in my floor's hallway and heard somebody running the stairs up and down really loudly. My friend got pale and was genuinely shocked, as was I. A couple of days later, I was home alone and spent some time in my room, with the door opened. I heard someone unlocking our apartment's door, opening and closing it. I then heard someone walking up the stairs and called out for my mom, as I assumed she got home early, but there was nobody there. To this day, I am absolutely sure that I even heard the key in the lock. I felt as if I was being watched quite often. Actually, it was so normal that I got used to it. My mom also said that she saw things moving in the corner of her eyes, and that she felt as if somebody was with her sometimes, even when she was alone. Those occurrences happen now and then, but luckily it didn't scare us too often. We kind of got used to it, and the ghost or whatever it was didn't do us any harm. Then, at age 14 or 15, my depressions got so bad that I started cutting and tried to commit suicide twice. During this time, my mom told me she saw a white fog walking up to my floor. I was a bit scared, but what was I supposed to do about it? Then an incident happened, which really convinced me that our apartment was haunted. I was in bed and tried to sleep but couldn't, as I wasn't tired at all. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard a heavy breathing coming from my couch, which was right across from my bed. Maybe some of you saw the others. There's a scene at the end where you can hear the old lady breathing. It sounded like this, but more evil. At first I thought that I was imagining it, but I was so shocked and frightened that I couldn't fall asleep and stayed awake for another couple of hours. The breathing never stopped during that time. When I finally had the guts to stand up and just get out of my room, when I passed the couch, the breathing got quieter, but got very loud once I was in the hallway. Luckily, my mom believed me and let me sleep in her room. She checked my room, but there was nobody there. Still, she also heard that breathing. I heard it again a couple of times during the day and at night. Aside from that, I saw flashes of light every day, no matter the time and weather. I read that seeing flashes of light can be a sign for migraine, but gladly, I never had a serious headache. Besides, I didn't see those flashes right before my eyes, but outside my windows. To this day, I'm convinced that the apartment was haunted, and as weird as it may sound, I believe that my depressions basically summoned something. However, I still can't explain the flashes. If you were to enter the front door of my house and walk straight to the end of the living room, a small door would lead to the upstairs. To the right of it was two big wooden doors for my father's bedroom, to the left a chair. The chair faced opposite of my father's room towards the TV. Against the wall left of the front door was a couch that faced the small stair door, which if you laid down using the armrest as a headrest, you could face the TV corner or the door corner. To the right of the TV corner is the dining room, and so on. I was on my room at first, and like most nights I would wake up to some noise. This time it came from in my room. It was the floor creaking, like someone was walking on it. I kept my eyes closed while I listened, pretending to sleep. Whatever it was stopped right in front of my face, and I could feel it was there. My breath slowed down. I was struck with fear, and wanted to tell to my brother, whom slept on the top bunk bed, but was too afraid. I peeked open my eye, just the slightest, and saw a white figure in front of me. I closed my eyes again, and just stayed still, hopeful that it would leave me alone. Eventually, I peeked again. It was gone. My fear was dulled, but still there. This next part makes the hairs on my entire body stand up. So like in the previous story, I put my blanket over my head to venture off to my father's room. I had a real thing for believing my blanket could protect me. But as soon as I hit the dining room, I feel like there are multiple people standing around me and watching me. I feel scared to the point of tears, but keep walking, thinking my blanket will protect me against whatever is in my house. When I get to the bug double wooden doors to his room, they are locked. What am I supposed to do? I can't go back to my room or the dining room. I decide it's best if I lay down on the couch and just stay under my blanket and go to sleep. Finally, I fall asleep. I wake up again. For some reason, I feel like it was 4 in the morning, and I instantly look into the top of the TV corner. There she was, the upper half of an elderly lady staring at me. She was somewhat blurry, but her eyes were darker than her pale, halted body. Then I hear it. It speaks to me. Its words were long and slow, feminine and impatient. "Cody, come outside and play with me." I froze for a second and then screamed and threw my blanket over my head and went to sleep. In the morning, I told everyone, and my brother seemed to believe me as soon as I spoke any words of it, he later told me. That night, he saw a white figure next to him staring at him while he pretended to sleep. The first figure I saw was staring at him. Me and my best friend Bella and her little sister and brother went on a trip to their grandparents' house where we spent the night. In the day, the place wasn't so scary. Heading into the backyard, I was shocked to see that their backyard was right next to a cemetery. But I was fascinated at the same time. Her grandpa helped us set up an old tent they used for camping. We both thought this was going to be pretty chill. It soon changed to night, and her and I were still awake watching Jaws. Deciding to go out back to the swing set, we sat down across from each other and started to swing. The small lantern we had sat on the floor rocking. We started talking about random things like school, relationships, and video games. Just normal things teenagers talked about, but then we started talking about ghost and scary stuffs. Bella used to live in a haunted house with a demon who tried to kill her and her family. She told me stories about it. As she was speaking, I saw something in the cemetery that caught my eyes, and my head drifted towards it. My eyes were wide when I saw this faceless, horned thing looking at us in the darkness. Bella asked me, "What are you looking at?" I refused to take my eyes off of it. I replied, "Do you see it?" Bella turned in the swing and stumbled, falling off the swing. The closest place was the tent we had set up. Grabbing the light, we both bolted to the tent, fumbling to zip up the door. Within the sleeping bags, we both were shaking. My phone was almost dead, but it didn't matter. I started to play a playlist on my phone to try and help us forget. As the music was playing, we could hear the fence rattle like something wanted to climb over it. Shortly, we heard a bull-like huff sound and thud away. The night dreaded on, and we fell asleep to the soft music playing. In the morning, we quickly grabbed our things and headed inside to tell everyone what had happened that night. Her grandparents were skeptical, but her sister and mother knew better.
If you enjoy the video, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to support us, share it to your bestie.